Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Susan Valakis, and I'm the Training Development Coordinator at Now, and as such, I bring you these webinars on the third Thursday of each month. If you've missed any of them, you can find replays on our website, nowfoods.com/webinars, or on our Now YouTube channel. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the chat bubble on your screen, submit your question, and we will respond to you with an answer by email. Today's webinar is on Zembrin, which is the trademarked ingredient in our Now Calm and Focus product. The webinar will run about 30 minutes and will introduce you to the history of how this ingredient came to be and about the clinical studies that support its efficacy. Our guest today to present this webinar is Dr. Ralph Tettey-Amlalo. Dr. Amlalo earned his Bachelor of Pharmacy degree from Rhodes University, South Africa, where he also obtained his Master of Science in Pharmaceutical Chemistry and his Doctorate in BioPharmaceutics. He then completed an MBA at Henley Business School, University of Reading in the UK, and Dr. Tettey-Amlalo is a registered pharmacist in both South Africa and Ghana. He began his career as a formulation scientist at Adcock Ingram, and subsequently joined Merck, Sharp, and Dome, where he held various positions in regulatory affairs, business development and strategy, strategic alliance management, and sales and marketing. Currently, Dr. Tettey-Amlalo serves as the managing director of H&H Pharmaceuticals, which supplies a clinically proven, patented, standardized local botanical ingredient for managing stress and cognitive support. Dr. Tettey-Amlalo is married and has 3 beautiful children. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ralph Tettey-Amlalo, who joins us tonight from Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome, Dr. Amlalo.
Thank you very much, Sue, and welcome to everyone. Greetings from down south, Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm happy to do this training, and I'm honored to have been invited by Now Foods to get this training done. Just a little bit of an icebreaker. So the picture you see behind me, I was telling Sue earlier, is H&H is a company that belongs and falls part of the bigger group called the Halls Group. Now, the Halls Group has their own private game reserve in South Africa. So from time to time, when we feel like we need a little bit of a break, just to do some clear our head and do some strategic thinking, we go down to the bush, take a drive, check out the wildlife, and from time to time also have a beer. So that's why this picture is there, just to give you some perspective of what we do down south in Johannesburg. All right, so just to start with the training, if you could please give me a moment to set up and just swap. Good. Is it good on your side too?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, cool. So today we'll be talking about Zembrin, which is a patented Sceletium tortuosum botanical extract from an ingredient or from a plant that is very indigenous to South Africa. It's an ingredient that has lived a very long time in the history of South Africa, and particularly with the indigenous people of South Africa. And I'll touch a little bit of its origin. And we are definitely excited that Now Foods has incorporated Zembrin in one of its flagship products, branded Calm and Focus. So today I'll just spend a little bit more time taking you through the history, touching a little bit on some of the early research and differentiation work that we've done. I think wrap up with some clinical studies that we've done, just to substantiate some of the claims that we make. And I think finally just also look at some of the applications where Zembrin can be used and has been used also in markets as well. Okay. So just to talk about the history, this is a plant that has deep roots in South Africa. As far back as the 17th century, the Dutch, those were the sailors that came and were trying to discover land and opportunities in South Africa, were one of the earliest people who actually discovered this plant. And you can see that it goes back as early as back as the 1600, right? At the time when the plant was discovered, it was referred to as the chewing stuff. So Kupnoop is the indigenous name that has been adopted in South Africa, which just means the chewing stuff. From that time, a lot of people didn't know what the plant was, and it was often confused with ginseng, thinking that it was something that had a derivative from ginseng. But as time went on, and we had physicians and botanists interested in this plant, they took some interest in it, and they actually realized that they could actually use this plant because of its benefits as a form of currency. And as later down in the 19th century, one of the commander of the settlement, known as Simon van der Steel, actually discovered that this plant could be it was quite ideal and had the benefits of profitable cultivation. Later in that century, that's when some pharmaceutical or pharmacological research started. There was some interest in pharmacological research in Sceletium, and there were some early recordings of what this plant could potentially do. In the early 1900s, it's when the family name was identified as Mesembryanthemum tortuosum, and they noticed that what that plant did was it caused dilation and decreased sensation. By 1984 to the late 90s, that's when the research in South Africa actually started. And the story behind this is there was a gentleman called Dr. Nigel Gericke, who at the time was actually living in Australia, who took a keen interest in this plant and then relocated to South Africa. And part of the reason how he developed it, and I think I'll touch a little bit about in subsequent slides, is that he actually lived with the communities, where this plant grew in the wild, to try and understand the different types of this plant, the different cultivars of this plant, and what it is that they do. And science has definitely shown that although the plant looks the same to the naked eye, different cultivars of this plant actually achieve different outcomes. And I'll also touch on that a little bit down the line as well. So in the late 1996 is when we started looking at, trying to understand the chemistry behind the plant and take a big step into whether we could actually develop an extract from the plant. When we were successful with that and we could reproducibly manufacture consistent extract, HGNH applied for a bioprospecting permit from the South African government. And the part of the reason why we need to do that is because this plant is protected by the Biodiversity Act of South Africa, meaning that you actually need a permit to cultivate the plant and grow it for commercial benefit. And in the soon after the permit was granted, Zembrin was launched, and it was launched with starting markets being South Africa and the USA. So the USA was one of our first markets where we actually launched Zembrin, and that was in 2012, 2013, thereabouts. Okay. All right, so just to focus a little bit of the origin, you could see that when some of these Dutch guys came across the plant in the Cape in the early 1870s, they chewed the plant, and what they noticed was that when they chewed it, it gave them strength to their limbs, meaning that they could walk days on end without getting tired. And I think by implication, it meant that it took the pain away. But another focus was that it made their memory strong, meaning that they could think, they could endure going forward. And part of the reason, this is very important, as I mentioned, that Dr. Nigel Gericke, when he was doing his research, he observed that when the indigenous people wanted to go on long treks without food, water, they chewed a certain cultivar of the plant, right? And that's what gave them strength to their limbs and just gave them endurance to be able to embark on some of these wild journeys, bearing in mind that these guys were nomads and they just walked, days on end. However, when they wanted to, from time to time, they would gather as a community and they would sort of play drums. They will set up a bonfire and they will sing and dance. And when they wanted to do that, they would chew a different cultivar of the same plant. And science had they definitely demonstrated that these two cultivars, the chemistry is different. So the one that they would use when they were playing drums, dancing around the fire, gave a euphoric effect. And we know quite well the chemical entity that's responsible for that effect. But the one that's, they would chew for long journeys on end is the one HGNH cultivated. And that's the one that we propagated and trademarked as Zembrin. And that's the one that keeps you calm, gives you focus, it makes your memory sharp, gives you strong, and gives you the ability to endure long journeys as well, or anything that you do. Okay. Just trying to turn the slide there. So where does the plant grow? So the plant actually grows in Southern Africa. Southern Africa, to which South Africa is part of Southern Africa. So the plant is not only indigenous to South Africa, it also grows in neighboring countries like Namibia, Botswana, some parts in Zimbabwe. But we being in South Africa, the plant indigenously grows in the western part of South Africa. And that's where you find the plant growing in the wild. We definitely do not partake in wild harvesting. I mean, it's obviously one of the requirements from the Biodiversity Act, and we're not encouraged to do that because the plant is marked as an endangered plant. And we just have to show that we grow it sustainably, which is what we do. Part of the trick also where we cultivate it, and I'll show in the next slide, is we cultivate our sustainable plant very far away from where this plant grows in the wild. And there's a reason for that. In the wild, there are 8 known species of these plants. Out of the 8 species, only 2 species have activity when it comes to effect, which is the Sceletium tortuosum and the Sceletium crassicole. 6 other species have 0 alkaloid activity, but nonetheless, all these plants look identical to the naked eye. They are very drought resistant plants, very distinct green leaves with prominent veins, and the nature of their leaves is called sceletus. Which is the Latin word for skeleton, and that's where Sceletium was adapted from. So we certainly grow on a farm, which is where we grow, and that's the slide up here. We grow sustainably, and there's also a social responsibility aspect to it as well. So I touched on earlier that we have to grow these things sustainably, and we have a dedicated seed bank with the right cultivar of chemistry that we use. And this is also an annual crop. So typically in the year, we start the growing process towards the end of the year, that's the end, which marks the end of our rainy season. Then we started in January and harvest sometime in August, September every year. It goes through a very quality controlled farming greenhouse activity. We make sure that, as much as possible, whatever we can control, we do control. Obviously, we grow these things free from chemicals, pesticides, so they're grown organically on the farm, and we have copious amounts of it that last every year. And I think as part of the benefit sharing agreement as well is we signed the benefit sharing agreement with the San Council. Now, the South African San Council is a council that looks after the interest of the indigenous San people. And part of what we do is that every year we pay royalties to the South African San Council. So think about it this way: for every kilo of Zembrin that is sold, a certain amount goes back to the South African San Council, and the money is used to develop the communities. Some of the developmental work that has happened is because of where the indigenous people typically live, water is a problem. So we normally use the money to give them access to water through the development of boreholes. Some of the money is also used for the provision of Wi-Fi, to help uplift technological advancement in the communities. Some of the money is also used to offer as bursaries to students and teachers for them to pursue degrees of higher learning, and also finally to also support the elderly. Those, through food stamps and also provision of medicines and other materials that the elderly members of the Sun Council would need. So it's a very important marketing point that I feel sometimes we don't make too much noise of. So in your situation, every bottle of Calm and Focus that is sold, I mean, we should always know that royalties are paid back. You're touching the lives of South Africans very far away from you, which I think is also a good thing. So I touched on the different types of Sceletium. There's 8 known species, right? Traditionally and culturally, unstandardized Sceletium is often referred to as canna, right? So what is canna? Canna is generally Sceletium that grows in the wild that has not been standardized and studied. Because these plants grow in the wild and they grow under very harsh conditions, they often tend to develop defense mechanisms against harsh weather or against harsh environmental conditions. And one of the chemicals so there are 4 known chemicals that we actually assay when we're looking at developing a quality controlled chemical fingerprint. But one of the chemicals that is pronounced in harsh conditions is a chemical known as Zembrin. Now, what Zembrin does is it produces a euphoric effect. So that is, you remember when I had touched on earlier that when the people want to sort of, they gather around in the community, play drums, sing and dance, they chew the specific cultivar. That cultivar that they chewed is generally the one that would give a euphoric effect, and that's what is generally known as canna. Zembrin, on the other hand, is the one that you will chew when you want endurance. It gives you strength in your limbs. You want to remain calm and focused, and that's the one, and that's what's trademarked as Zembrin. So you would realize that with canna, there's high risk of mesembrane, and with Zembrin, we generally don't have mesembrane. In fact, we deliberately keep our mesembrane content to less than 5%. Canna is not clinically studied. Zembrin, we have 8 human clinical studies in our database. And one thing you would also notice is that with canna, because it's unstandardized, generally higher doses are required. So doses ranging from 200 milligrams to 500 milligrams, as opposed with Zembrin, because it's standardized and potent, only 25 milligrams is what's needed to achieve effect. Canna is normally used for recreational purposes. So you see that there is a whole industry where canna plays a big role. And you would typically see that in the entertainment industry, especially when vaping industry, smoking, where people generally, and even in some beverage industries as well, where people want to get a sense of highness and happiness, right? Our industry is very different. So what we typically focus on is stress alleviation, mood enhancement, and that's what we want to focus on. Canna grows in the wild, like I touched on earlier, but we grow in a sustainable, scalable cultivation environment. And there is obviously no social responsibility that is given to the people of the sand where canna is concerned, but Zembrin has the responsibility of giving back a certain percentage of sales back to the community. So Zembrin has a very unique fingerprint, and that forms the basis of our quality assurance, and that's how we make sure that we're growing the right cultivar year in, year out. Yeah. All right, then just to touch a little bit on the unique mode of action. I mean, how does Zembrin really works, and what makes Zembrin works? Zembrin has a unique mode of action. For just 25 milligram dose, you're actually getting 2 benefits. It's taken us quite some time to understand the ratio. I mean, we know the mode of action, but how they work and in what order they work, right? So what we feel, I mean, what the data seems to suggest is that Zembrin has a very strong phosphodiesterase 4 inhibition activity, and that is the pathway that's responsible for cognitive function, neuroprotection, positive mood, and immune system support, right? But because of the mesembrane activity, we also see some sort of serotonin reuptake inhibition, and that's where we get the stress alleviation, mood enhancement, and also the calmness. So that's the beautiful thing, and that's why the Now Foods Calm and Focus brand is ideally suited and unique, and actually enhances exactly what Zembrin does. So with just a single dose of Zembrin, you can remain calm, but not fall asleep, but you can remain calm and focus, which is a very unique attribute of Zembrin. Then the third one is just attenuation of the AMPA-mediated pathways. Basically, what it does is that it just offers neuroprotection to the neurons in the brain. But the key ones are the phosphodiesterase inhibition, which links to focus and cognition, and the serotonin reuptake inhibition, which leads to calmness, stress alleviation, and mood enhancement. So these are very key critical outputs of Zembrin. All right, so that's what we said, but is that what the science is saying? So we have a couple of clinical studies that I just wanted to highlight on, just to see if Zembrin actually demonstrates and says that we could do these things. Just focusing on some of the key highlights. So all our clinical studies, you will see that were performed in healthy population. Generally people who would not have been clinically diagnosed, because we're not talking treatment here. So it's just support. So one of the studies that we looked at, which was done by Chu, and this is one of our flagship studies, was looking at focus and complex attention, where we took Zembrin at a 25 milligram dose. It was in a capsule. We looked at 21 healthy subjects, and they were supplemented with Zembrin capsule over a period of 3 weeks. And there were a couple of tests were done, looking at the CNS vital signs, Hamilton depression rating at baseline, and also at regular intervals. So what we saw here was that with Zembrin at 25 milligrams, Zembrin, participants who were taking Zembrin showed a statistical change, statistical significant change with improved complex attention, as opposed to those who were on the placebo from the baseline. So this supports our fact that, Zembrin, when we take Zembrin, it improves working memory, has the ability to improve attention control, response inhibition, and concept formulation. So it's great for people who deal with increased processing speed, psychomotor speed, or generally just have a lot of complex demands and they need to make decisions very quickly, which I'm pretty much sure it's everyone. If you look at the activities of the general person throughout the day, you're always in the phase of making decisions or processing something, even if it's your phone, playing a game, or making decisions as well. So that's what the study by Chu demonstrated, and it's one of our flagship studies and resonates very well with the Calm and Focus product as well. Our next study, which was done by Hoffman et al., also looked at, it was a partially sports study, but looking at mood and visual tracking and recreation and recreationally trained men and women. So these are not elite sports people, just ordinary people who just want to go to the gym or do recreational sports, So what we're looking at was an 8-day supplementation of Zembrin at also at 25 milligrams. And where we're looking at reactive agility, visual tracking, and mood. Here we actually took the numbers up a little bit. So this was 60 participants. I think these were university students as well. So 60 participants between the ages of 20 and 35. And they had supplementation And they were tested on 2 days, so before the supplementations, and 2 hours after supplementation on day 8. Also subjected to a couple of tests looking at alertness and the visual analog scale. And the participants also had to fill in a questionnaire focusing on the mood states, right? And what this also showed, once again, at 25 milligrams, is that Zembrin significantly improved focus and attention. So once again, focus and attention come into play where Zembrin is concerned, which is also great in terms of enhancing brain power for e-gamers, e-sports participants, and also active individuals, right? So where you come across people who need that focus and attention, and it's everybody. You know, Zembrin and calm and focus can be the solution for that as well. Yeah. Then this study looked at, so we're moving a little bit away from the, from the focus, attention, into the stress and tension, nervousness and fear. And this is a very interesting study. So this is the study where we get our quick action, or time to how quickly does Zembrin actually work. This actually it looks quite technical, but the reason why it looks technical is because we're actually measuring using functional MRI the rate of blood flow in the brain. That's essentially what it is. But essentially what it was looking at is what happens in the brain when an individual is exposed to a fight or flight situation, and that's when you're exposed to a fear opportunity. If you take Zembrin, what actually happens in the brain? And that's what the study talks about, which is to attest the acute effects of Zembrin, using functional MRI, looking at the connectivity and the activity in the brain. So this was a double-blinded, placebo-controlled crossover study. 16 participants were scanned and enrolled into the study. And what we noticed was that after a single dose of Zembrin, the amygdala portion, the amygdala functionality of the brain, the reactivity to fear, to fearful faces, was significantly attenuated. So in layman's English, what it means is that those who were on Zembrin, right, and within 2 hours, right, we realized that the fight or flight responsibility action of the brain was significantly attenuated in candidates that were on Zembrin. Right. So what it then means is that it slows or decreases the impact of stressful events in the brain, which then gives you time to focus and make decisions and act and move. So in a fight or flight situation, so basically in a heavy, stressed out environment, what would you normally do and how would you respond if you're on Zembrin? And this obviously, confirms the phosphodiesterase 4 inhibition pathway in the brain, which also focuses on the fact that when you're exposed to this kind of situation, and if you're on Zembrin, you are given time to remain calm. So you're not going to jump around and just react to your fear. But whilst you're calm, you also have the ability to remain focused, right? And you have the ability to reduce tension and then act, which is a very powerful study. But once again, we remain focused in spite of nervousness, tension, or fear. Okay. Now, I think finally on one more study on stress and tension, this was a study that was done by Professor Dimfel in Germany. And that's a unique study because I think the studies that I have touched on so far focus a little bit more on the younger population. So this is a study where we wanted to look at the effects of maybe what would happen, when elderly people take Zembrin. So in this study, we actually looked at 60 healthy male and female, but they were aged between 50 and 80 years old. And they received a daily dose of either the placebo or 25 milligrams Zembrin, or 50 milligrams Zembrin. So here there's the opportunity to actually look at what happens in elderly population when you take a higher dose. And this was a 6-week supplementation. And the effect of this was that although we saw some response at 25 milligrams in this population, we actually saw statistical significant decreased tension in this population at a higher dose, which is about 50 milligrams. And it's not unusual because typically people in this age bracket would obviously be experiencing very high degrees of stress. Some of them would obviously be going through cognitive decay because of their age. If you're approaching 80 years old, your brain does not respond, as rapidly as you would if you were much younger. But the good news is that to improve mental health and also enhance well-being with respect to cognitive function, stress, mood, in the elderly population, typically a higher dose is recommended, which in our instance is 50 milligrams as well. So Zembrin is very good for the younger generation and also equally good for the elderly generation as well. And there's a whole range of reasons why calm and focus will be applicable for the elderly as well. I mean, just off the bat, if you look at women in particular, stress cycles around menopausal phases of life, the elderly, early onset of memory losses. These are very high stressful phases in the elderly or in the older population. And calm and focus can also produce and offer a solution for these types of population as well. Okay, just to also touch on some selected information. Typically, we do not perform clinical studies on pregnant women. So we have no data to suggest that or to confirm the effects of Zembrin in pregnant ladies and as well as lactating mothers as well. So as a general rule, we generally say we don't have data to support these effects. But also as a general rule, particularly for, and you may come across it, people who are already on some form of pharmaceutical application, so be it an anti-anxiety drug or a mood stabilizer or antidepressant drug, generally we would always advise that they speak to their health practitioner before taking Zembrin. There is a risk of potentiation because of how Zembrin works, very similar to how some of these drugs work. But we always advise that they should please talk to their health practitioner. So that's just the standard statement that we offer. So that's calm and focus. We sincerely believe that calm and focus, the position is right. The science backs the claims that that calm and focus makes for both seeing calming effects, but also more importantly, the PDE4 inhibition pathway, which speaks to focus, cognition, attention, which I have demonstrated. And there are various applications where this can apply to, and now in the world of e-gaming, which is, I think it's a market that perhaps hasn't been explored thoroughly, but there's a world out there where people, have to focus and, processing speed, psychomotor speed, and Zembrin and calm and focus can definitely offer that solution. Then so some of these compelling unpack claims that we've seen, like I touched on the processing speed, that's where you see the gentleman with the e-gaming is, or for recreational sports, you can see cognitive flexibility, also processing speed when you're playing video games, or the ability for the young executive or the busy executive to make busy, complex executive decisions throughout the course of the day, or if you're a student and you just need to prepare for exams, or you've got some high intensity work that needs to be done, or if you just want to relax and just enjoy the day as well, Zembrin also reduces tension, nervousness, and fear. Okay. So just to wrap it all up, I mean, I know it's been a mouthful. So the good thing with Zembrin is it's been clinically tested. I've shared about 4 clinical outcomes. We do have more than that in our database. It's a low dose, only 25 milligrams is required to see an effect. You know, I touched on the fact that sometimes, not sometimes, almost certainly higher doses of the unstandardized scanner will be required. And that's how you can, it's one of the key ways you can see how you can differentiate that. It's safe. We have a full suite of safety and toxicology data to support the fact that it's safe. And even with our dose of 25 milligrams, we're not barely touching the surface. We can go very high, but we just want to keep it safe at 25 milligrams. It's fully traceable. Every lot of Zembrin that is used in every product can be traced back to our seed stock. And we manufacture our extract based on very high EU GMP standards. Key thing is that it's dual acting. So you're not only getting the benefit of one, so you're getting 2 for the price of 1. So you're getting the benefit of being calm, but you're not feeling groggy. You're not going to fall asleep. You just stay calm, but you focus, laser sharp so that you can get some work done. It's very well tolerated. No harsh side effects, but generally, participants who have participated in our clinical studies may complain of some headaches and diarrhea, but these are very few and far between. We have sulfur-fem grass status in the USA. And just to share, we also sell in some parts of Asia, Japan, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia. We're working very hard to get into South Korea and also working for the EU market as well. The great thing about Zembrin is that it's experiential. And that's when I touched about it in the fMRI study, is that anyone who takes Zembrin, right, can feel the effect very quickly. So even if you don't believe in anything else, the fact that you feel the effects within 0 to 2 hours, it's a very powerful marketing tool. As fast acting, as you've seen, you would definitely feel something just under 2 hours. And the beautiful thing for us is that we grow our plants sustainably, so we're not depleting wild harvests, which is already endangered. But more importantly, that always remember that every type of calm and focus that is sold, that gets available to someone, you're helping communities in South Africa that you just don't understand how far these revenues go back to help these communities.
Excellent. Wow. Thank you, Dr. Amlalo. What an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed hearing how you tied the discovery and the history to the clinical studies, and it's just so awesome to know that the revenues are working to help the communities in your area. Just really, really awesome. So thank you. I look very forward to trying it myself, actually. I wanted to remind our audience that we will not be taking any questions today, but as we always do, you can use the chat bubble on your screen, submit your questions, and then we will reply to you by email. So with that, thank you so much again, Dr. Amlalo, for joining us today for an excellent presentation. And thank you to our audience as well for taking time out of their day to join us. So we'll see you next month. Be sure to watch your email for topic and login details for the April webinar.
Thank you very much, Sue.
Thank you, Dr. Amlalo, and good night, everybody.